good evening and welcome to our next discussion in the series about the basic political and economic problems and processes of our time. In the first series, a year ago, we talked about societies with economies and systems of government rather like our own now and over the next 25 years or so. We tried then with a number of eminent thinkers to see what were the fundamental weaknesses of liberal democracies with mixed economies and to estimate their chances of surviving the pressures and problems of the last quarter of this century. This time round, we're assuming, for the sake of argument, that such liberal democratic societies have only a limited future, as many people already seem to think, and that they'll have to be replaced by radically different systems of government and economic organizations, as well as by quite new social arrangements with unfamiliar values and objectives. So the idea this time is to get a more precise picture of what the alternatives are and what life will be like living under them. And tonight, we turn our attention to what might be called the libertarian left, or more popularly, anarchism, the type of society in which the state plays little or no part at all, in which all wealth is owned in common by the people, and all work is shared. All decisions are taken in the sight of and with the knowledge of all, and in which relations of all kinds are non-exploitative, and where the concepts of leaders and led are thought to have no meaning. However great the obvious practical difficulties inherent in such a scheme, thinkers down the ages keep coming back to the idea of having no government as the best solution to the seemingly insuperable practical and theoretical problems of having any tolerable form of government. Anarchist ideas still have a vigorous life, and we're fortunate to be able to explore them tonight with Professor Noam Chomsky of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Professor Chomsky has, in a sense, become well known twice over, once because of his revolutionary work in linguistic theory, and secondly, and more germane to our topic tonight, because of his early and uncompromising resistance on moral grounds to the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War. From his experience in the politics of protest, he's evolved as a political theorist and essayist in his own right, restating the anarchist or libertarian position in a number of writings. Professor Chomsky, perhaps we should start by trying to define what is not meant by anarchism. The word anarchy, after all, is derived from the Greek, literally meaning no government. Now, presumably people who talk about anarchy or anarchism as a system of political philosophy don't just mean that, as it were, as of January the 1st next year, government as we now understand it would suddenly cease. There would be no policemen, no rule of the road, no laws, no tax collectors, no post office, and so forth. They presumably mean something more complicated than that.
Well, yes to some of those questions, no to others. They may very well mean no policemen, but I don't think they would mean no rules of the road. In fact, I should say to begin with that the term anarchism is used to cover quite a range of political ideas, but I'm going to follow your lead and think of it as the libertarian left. And from that point of view, anarchism can be conceived as a kind of voluntary socialism, that is, a libertarian socialist or anarcho-syndicalist or a communist anarchist in the tradition of, say, Bakunin and Kropotkin and others, had in mind a highly organized form of society, but a society that was organized on the basis of organic units, organic communities. And generally they meant by that the workplace or the neighborhood or both. And from those two basic units involving the place where a person works and spends his creative energies and the place where he lives in relation to his neighbors and others around him, from those two basic units there could derive through federal arrangements a highly integrated kind of social organization, which might be national or even international in scope, where decisions could be made over a substantial range, but by delegates who are always part of the organic community from which they come and are returned to it and are revocable and in general would live there, in fact.
So it doesn't mean a society in which there is, literally speaking, no government so much as a society in which the primary authority and source of authority comes, as it were, from the bottom up and not exactly from the top down, where representative democracy, as we have it in the United States and in Britain, would be regarded as a form of from the top down authority, even though ultimately the voters decide.
Well, representative democracy, as in, say, the United States or Great Britain, would be criticized by an anarchist of this school on really two grounds. First of all, because there is a monopoly of power centralized in the state, and secondly, and critically, because representative democracy is limited to the political sphere and in no way, in no serious way, encroaches on the economic sphere. And anarchists of this tradition have always held that that democratic control of one's productive life is at the core of any serious human liberation, or for that matter, any significant democratic practice. That is, as long as individuals are compelled to rent themselves on the market to those who are willing to hire them, and as long as their role in production is simply that of ancillary tools, then there are striking elements of coercion and oppression that make talk of democracy very limited, if even meaningful.
Historically, have there been any sustained examples on any substantial scale of societies which approximated to the anarchist ideal?
There are small societies, small in number, that have, I think, done so quite well, and there are a few examples of large-scale libertarian revolutions which were largely anarchist in their structure. As to the first, small societies extending over a long period, I myself think the most dramatic example is perhaps the Israeli kibbutzim, which for a long period, may or may not be true today, but for a long period really were constructed on anarchist principles, that is, of self-management, direct worker control, integration of agriculture, industry, service, personal life on an egalitarian basis with direct and, in fact, quite active participation in self-management, and were, I should think, extraordinarily successful by, well, almost any measure that one can impose.
But they were presumably, and indeed still are, in the framework of a conventional state which guarantees certain
well, they weren't always.
stabilities.
Well, actually, the history is rather interesting. Up until, since 1948, they've been in the framework of a conventional state. Prior to that, they were within the framework of a colonial enclave. And in fact, there was a subterranean society, largely cooperative society, which was not really part of the system of the British Mandate, but was functioning outside of it. And to some extent, that survived the establishment of the state, though, of course, it became integrated into the state, and, in my view, lost a fair amount of its libertarian socialist character through this process and through other processes which are unique to the history of that region, which we need not go into. However, as functioning libertarian socialist institutions, I think they are an interesting model that I think is highly relevant to advanced industrial societies in a way in which some of the other examples that have existed in the past are not. A good example of a really large-scale anarchist revolution, or largely anarchist revolution, in fact the best example to my knowledge, is the Spanish Revolution in 1936, in which over most of republican Spain there was a quite inspiring, in my view, anarchist revolution that involved both industry and agriculture over substantial areas, developed in a way which to the outside looks spontaneous, though in fact if you look at the roots of it, one discovers that it was based on 3 generations of experiment and thought and work which had extended anarchist ideas to very large parts of the population in this largely pre-industrial, though not totally pre-industrial society. And that again was, well, by both human measures and even anyone's economic measures, quite successful. That is, production continued effectively. Workers in farms and factories proved quite capable of managing their affairs without coercion from above, contrary to what lots of socialists, communists, liberals, and others wanted to believe. And in fact, you can't tell what would happen. That anarchist revolution was simply destroyed by force, but during the period of its in which it was alive, I think it was highly successful and as I say, in many ways really inspiring testimony to the ability of poor working people to organize, manage their affairs extremely successfully without coercion and control. How relevant the Spanish experience is to an advanced industrial society, one might question in detail.
It's clear that the fundamental idea